Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with joining our CEO in thanking all of our department heads, our deputy executives, all the staff that have, including the CEO, of course, that have put a great deal of time and energy into putting this final budget recommendation before the board and the public. I think it's evidence of being very deliberate and thoughtful as it relates to what I think most of us can agree is some pending economic challenge, general economic challenge, which I think is, very wise for us to be considering at this point, given, as was discussed earlier on a different matter, the fact that cost of living and inflation continue to hamper even short-term budgets. I do respect the fact that a good deal of consideration has been put into our reserve status. As I think I've mentioned here before, I was in these chambers in 2008 and 9 and in 10 as a seated member of the board, and that's something I would hope that during my tenure I and we don't have to go through again. It was very painful. It was something that in some instances decimated service delivery in many cases to our most vulnerable populations. And so I think being cognizant of that experience and reflecting back on it, that it can happen again, and that we now have a chance to finally understand what we can do to try and soften that blow, I think is paramount to this budget and future budgets. I want to thank the Community Care First group that has not just presented the report, but also sent a number of emails to us in recent days, explaining that from their position, this board can and should have should rate as high priority a number of different social services and housing services, and that's not lost on me. It's not lost, I don't think, on anyone on this board. We have an obligation to not just balance our budget every year. Legally, we do. But I think, again, it's a reflection of our values, and so we have an opportunity and an obligation every year during June and September to make sure that we check ourselves, quite frankly, to make sure that we believe wholeheartedly that our priorities are reflected in how we appropriate resources. So finally, I want to make a suggestion, and this is one that comes from a lot of forethought over the last several weeks that I've shared with our county executive and our county council. I think it speaks to some of what has been communicated by many of our constituents in terms of the outstanding need for greater affordable housing opportunities in Sacramento County. And I think it's a creative idea. It's a new idea as far as I can tell, but one that I think we should feel obligated to at least try. And I will do my best to try and summarize it as best I can. What inspired the idea was reflection on the Williamson Act. And for those that may be watching or in chambers that may be unfamiliar with the Williamson Act, it's generally it's a piece of enabling legislation that permits counties to provide a property tax incentive, a tax break to participating ranchers, farmers that keep their acreage in agricultural production for a minimum amount of time, usually 20 years. And there's a contractual arrangement with the county that the acreage will stay in agricultural production for that amount of time, and during that amount of time, the participating agricultural interest will receive that property tax break. That's a very general explanation of it. And the purpose for it was to conserve farmland and protect it from encroaching development. So it occurred to me that if we can do that for the purpose of conserving farmland, which is a laudable, mission, why couldn't we do something similar for the provision of affordable housing in the county? And so the idea, simply put, is that we would look to participating, probably multifamily landlords in our county who obviously have a built-in interest to be made whole, meaning that they're going to typically command the highest rents that the market can bear. I think we know that all too well, especially in this current time with this market. And if that is their compelling interest that drives their economic posture, then given the fact that the property tax authority lies with this particular jurisdiction, with the county of Sacramento, why wouldn't we look at ways that we could have some type of an arrangement, whether it's contractual or otherwise, with participating landlords to provide some kind of tax and property tax incentive so that there's an agreement that the rents for those participating units would be provided at below market rates. So in other words, the landlords would be made whole. The provision of affordable housing could be achieved by way of some agreement that the participating rental rates would not exceed a certain percentage below market rate. And of course, it would have to be paid for. And I'm suggesting today that we look to our general fund, we look to our reserves, which are getting healthier, but as Amanda pointed out, are still we're still just below halfway of what the standard should be. But again, the reserves are intended for dire circumstances, and I would challenge anyone to tell me that we're not in that dire circumstance right now in terms of the dearth of affordable housing. What I'm suggesting is what I believe to be a modest amount to be parked or set aside for the current budget year at $5 million to build a pilot project around this concept that I've generally outlined here today, and see how it works. And in the meantime, before any tax incentive was to be made available, of course, there'd be some legwork that would have to be done in terms of the mechanics of how it would work, and of course, with the advice of County Counsel's office to understand the do's and don'ts legally of what we can and cannot do. There's been some discussion that perhaps it be in the form of a rebate, a tax rebate, thereby kind of thwarting the expectation that we'd have to seek time-consuming efforts at enabling legislation similar to the Williamson Act. But that is the idea, and we've had very robust discussion in June, and certainly just with the staff presentation today and some of the questions that we have posed from the dais around homelessness and affordable housing. But outside of our housing authority, the county itself really doesn't get too much into the affordable housing business. And I'm not suggesting we do that, but I'm suggesting we work within the taxing authority that we do possess to at least try something different, be creative, do something that hasn't been done before, at least from some of the research that County Counsel's office has done and I've done personally. I don't think it's been done in the state of California by any county. But that is generally, Mr. Chair, the idea that I'd like to put out there for consideration. And again, it would be for a pilot, so it's not, I'm not suggesting that we institutionalize this without some ability to have a look back to see how effective it is or isn't. But I think we're obligated to try. So that's what I would like to suggest.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Serna. I know a couple colleagues are in the queue. Just wanted to ask, this would be for a prescribed period of time. The Williamson Act, and you may have talked to that, was, basically upon entry is 20 years, and then it's a 10-year evergreen clause once you march down to 10. Gives both parties, it gives the party who entered it the ability to choose to exit or not. And so you would be talking about a prescribed, and hence maybe some of the funding set aside, because if you were going to fund this, you'd have to do, if you're going to enter into some contractual arrangement with a landlord, property owner to accomplish that, it would be for prescribed period of time, which you didn't specify, which would be part of the discussion in future. But
yeah, I think that'd be part of the mechanics, Mr. Chair, in terms of, figuring out what we think, because it's not been done before, what an optimal time frame would be, because obviously we don't want to have it be too short, too brief. We'd like it to have some very similar characteristics to the Williamson Act in terms of it running with the property. So I think all those details could be worked out in the coming months, should be the will of the board to support this concept.
Okay, so I have Supervisor Frost and Supervisor Desmond in the queue.
I guess I have a question for our county executive and our budget director to say how would this impact our budget? There's this defined number of, I guess, agricultural businesses, but there's a huge amount of need when it comes to affordable housing. And so how do you pick which apartment complex or which property owner? How do you make that decision? And can we even require I guess this is for county council, can we require a property owner to can we put requirements on them regarding what they can charge for rent if they are, part of this program? So I guess this is, I hadn't heard anything, so I'm just wondering how it impacts our budget, and can we actually do something like that?
So I'll take the first piece, and then Ms. Travis can take the second piece. So we would have to take the money out of one of our reserve categories, because the rest is all budgeted unless you decide to not do something that we've talked about today. We would have to, this would be voluntary on the part of a property owner. And so we have not worked out the details. We've had 2 very brief conversations. So we would have to engage planning staff and finance staff to help us figure out what this would all look like. And as Supervisor Serna said, it would be a pilot. So we would start small so that we could identify, how this works and is it having the impact we want. This would at least start out to be a homeless prevention program, because our vacancy rate of apartments in the county of Sacramento is very, very low. So it's hard to find a vacant unit. So it would primarily be a reduction in rent for folks who are currently housed, which is a good thing because so many folks are rent burdened right now and potentially on the brink of homelessness. So, but then as units vacate, then we would be able to house folks who are potentially homeless when they move in.
I would just interrupt there for a second and add, Ann's completely right in terms of it being kind of preemptive to make sure that household that's that one paycheck away doesn't fall into the circumstance of homelessness. However, we also know too well that in this marketplace that our housing choice voucher system is struggling immensely in terms of finding willing participants in the voucher system, landlords that are willing to take the vouchers. So I think there's probably an opportunity to explore how it might be used to incent the use of those vouchers, which are oftentimes people that are homeless today. So that is something that I think we'd have to look at.
Agreed.
And I'll just echo the county executive's comments regarding the voluntariness of this program. So any potential landlord that wanted to participate would be doing so voluntarily. So the county would not be forcing any participants, to address your question. As we obviously see it today, that's the goal.
Thank you. I'll yield for now.
Okay, thanks. Supervisor Desmond.
Thanks, Chair. And No, this is a very innovative idea. Certainly, I'm someone who much prefers ways to create incentives to both maintain units in affordable housing and to promote additional affordable housing. And I'm glad you mentioned that was going to be one of my questions to Supervisor Serna. Was it going to be just focused on current affordable housing units to try to maintain them as such and possibly create a better mechanism to incentivize landlords to accept emergency housing vouchers? Or could it be something, and I know that as a pilot, a limited amount of funds, would it be something also that might incentivize new construction of affordable housing?
No, it's a great question. I would point to the fact that we actually have that. So is my mic on? Yeah, it seems like we actually have that system available now. It's a tax credit system for the provision of affordable housing. So, in fact, it's actually a good reminder that there is some kind of parallel precedent here because of that system. That's basically a tax incentive for the provision of new affordable housing. This would be a tax incentive for the provision of affordable housing that is below market rate rents for existing. So it'd be kind of a complement to what we actually have now for new.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification. Yeah, for the preservation of our existing inventory, which we do not want to jeopardize. Certainly, it seems like it's just such a tough nut for us to crack in Sacramento County to both maintain current inventory and attract more affordable housing. Okay. Well, thank you. That's all I have for now.
Okay. I just would say too that in June we had a discussion about the scatter site housing, which we're able to typically working with our nonprofit partners to again provide housing in a small congregate setting of 6 or less in most cases, in single family settings in large part. And it would seem to me that there's an opportunity to if you incorporate the idea, you look at multifamily properties, but I know in the single family, as it relates to the scatter site housing, we're out there competing in the market as well. And if you had this tool, whoever we were partnering with, to go out to a landlord and say, we're looking to do this. Obviously, it's voluntary, but they would have this in the toolkit to go to that landlord. And so you could actually then assure that you could have, both the housing set aside for that period of time with somebody contractually, but you would have the rent factored in, because we're paying out of general fund, if I'm not mistaken, for scatter site housing, and we're paying market rate in a lot of cases, again, working with, certainly our nonprofit partners. And so it seems to me that there's some real opportunity here to use this in different ways. Again, it would be voluntary. It's going to be limited. There's not unlimited, with the amount of money talked about here, it's a sizable chunk, but certainly depending upon how you build it, you're going to have to endow it. That's the other thing. So I think, if you're looking at setting money aside, you probably wouldn't spend that in year one. You might not spend that even over the course of 2 or 3, but over the period of time, once you decided on that, then you'd have to have that endowment set aside as a reserve or some other mechanism. So, but I think it has, a lot of merit. And, if you're, looking at ways to try to be creative and to, basically stabilize for folks that are either housing insecure and or are, homeless or formerly homeless, this is a way, I think, to incentivize at the local level. I don't know. There's the tools we have, certainly when it comes to looking at the issue, are somewhat limited, but this might be a good way to be creative, and I think it is a good way to be creative and maybe incentivize folks to be a partner with us in trying to address the issue that faces across the spectrum. So, Supervisor Kennedy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Supervisor Serna, for coming up with, a creative idea. And I think we do need to find incentives to get more people in this marketplace, as well as make our processes and procedures easier and less expensive. It almost sounds like, a long time ago, Section 8 idea to incentivize property owners to want to participate. Whether the market's there or not now, I don't know, but it's certainly something that is very, very worthy of more discussion and, find out what the details are and how it would shake out. One thing I will just give my regular cautionary tale is when it comes to scattered site housing, The per person cost of scattered site housing, I realize that it's popular for a number of reasons, but the per person cost and the sustainability is questionable. I mean, when you're housing 5 or 6 people at a time, that's going to be very difficult to do anything that is significant in the community. So I guess my point of that is, and plus the fact that it's very difficult to find operators at this point with the capacity to continue to do scattered site housing. If we were to go down that road and look at it to get the most bang for our buck and help people who need to be housed, I think it's got to be multifamily. The single family housing scattered to 2,000 houses is not going to ever happen. It's not going to happen at 500 houses. And we have a crisis of such magnitude that without looking at multifamily housing opportunities, we're just never going to get there. Thank you.
I would just add that this is the concept is really aimed at just that, because I agree. I don't think the economies of scale work or the efficiency of what we're attempting to do works with lower density housing.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure, go ahead.
Didn't the board in June set aside a very modest amount of funds for increased scattered site?
Another $1 million.
$1 million.
Thank you.
Have we had success in that realm?
Well, no, we're struggling.
Yeah. Okay. If I could, though, I guess my point being that we look at housing across the spectrum, and you look at transitional, you look at permanently supportive. You look at certainly the numbers that need to be tackled here. And I guess that was the reason for my suggestion, was to take a look at that, is that if you're going to incentivize, because not everybody, necessarily fits into the apartment setting, not everybody fits in the transitional, not everybody fits in the congregate 6 to a household. Again, we don't have unlimited dollars or unlimited programmatic ability here. But again, that's why I suggested that, in recognizing we're trying to go to scale, you're going to look at multifamily apartment complexes, and you'll get much greater numbers. But I guess I just think, again, as we're talking about this, that at least look to that as a consideration. Or it might be that you modify your scatter site approach. If you bring vouchers to the table and you buy into that, there's a way to maybe to assist, and so that you help people move through the spectrum. Some folks may go directly from being housing unstable to a supported unit. It works just fine. But we know that there's a variety of different circumstances, and so again, I think that if we're looking to create something that creates the opportunity and gives us stability, so we can count on that number of available units over time, then we ought to at least be open to that consideration. So recognizing what both you and Supervisor Kennedy said, Mr. Serna.
Sure.
Okay. Supervisor Frost.
So I just want to ask, you're talking about a property tax incentive, and so this isn't setting aside $5 million from our general fund. It's actually reaching into our property tax, which to me is our most stable form of income, or one of them.
Right. Our general
Mm-hmm.
fund is funded obviously in part by property tax. So that's the idea, that it would come out of reserves out of this budget for the pilot.
And absent a legislative change, we cannot reduce someone's property tax. So it is very likely what we would have to do is the property owner would have to pay the property tax, and then we would figure out a formula to do a rebate based on the rent reductions to a below market value rent rate. So it would definitely come directly from the general fund. Even if we did a property tax reduction, it would hit the general fund, because we wouldn't then be getting that
so
revenue.
It's technically not connected to the property tax.
Although that's how we would do the formula to calculate the rebate. But you're right, it doesn't come from property tax.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So we have that idea on the table. We're going to come back. Let me go with my colleagues, because I have a few items I wanted to touch on. But let me